Good evening. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Sunday Night SitDown. My name is Ross Tedder. I'm the Civic Engagement Coordinator here at One Hood Power. For those of you who don't know, the Sunday Night SitDown is a chance for us to learn more about stakeholders, those who make decisions, and other decision makers. So tonight our special guest is Helen Gym. Some of you may know Ms. Gym as the first Asian American woman to serve on Philadelphia City Council over across on the other side of the state. From us here in Pittsburgh, and others might know her as a community organizer. But however you know her, tonight she's joining us as a candidate for mayor of Philadelphia. So let's welcome Helen.
Hey, Ross, it's great to join you in One Hood. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Helen. We really appreciate it. First things first, this is going to be a pretty informational, interview just about you, but what motivated you to first get involved in politics?
Look, for more than 20 years, I have been a community organizer. I am a Philly mom who had to take on some of Philadelphia's toughest battles. When my oldest daughter was about to enter kindergarten, the state of Pennsylvania took over the entire school district of Philadelphia and told us we were going to be turned over to a single for-profit company to exploit our kids in our schools when we were struggling to have basic funds to keep doors open and keep resources going in our city. And, myself and thousands of others said, absolutely not on our watch. And so we mobilized and organized coalitions across faith communities, educators, parents, community members who beat that proposal back. And that, effectively launched a lot of my work in the public education space. Before that, I had represented lots of different communities, particularly in immigrant neighborhoods and communities that many people weren't, English speakers. Some people weren't even U.S. citizens, but we had to organize nonetheless because our families were being torn apart through a mass detention and deportation pipeline because kids would go to school and would absolutely not even be serviced for basic language needs because people were denied healthcare or access to food or basic housing. And I figured out a way about how we lean into community strengths, not into like the things that we are constantly denied or what we can't have, but what we deserve, what we need, and what we're going to fight like hell for. For more than 20 years, I fought within city communities, learning about how to bring people together in really dark times. And we faced some really dark times. Honestly, the thing that got me into politics was in a former mayor who closed down 30 public schools in a 2-hour meeting. Defended the closure of fire stations, libraries, recreation centers, and after-school programs. And at that point, I had been able to do so much different levels of organizing. We could amass maybe 1,000 people into the streets. And it finally came to me that we're not going to live like this anymore. I'm not going to if we have the chance to actually step into City Hall, what we were proving was that the people were organized and City Hall was out of whack. So if that's the case, then it was time for the people to come for City Hall. And if we were in those seats, everything had to change. Everything. All the things that we said were unlivable and had to change, then they had to do so. And I think for the last 2 terms, I've tried to show how we can end that state takeover that, initially propelled me into things. We can put back nurses and counselors, arts and music into every school. I kickstarted a clean water campaign because when I came in 2016, Flint, Michigan had just happened, and I wasn't going to allow our kids to be poisoned. And that ended up not just being, a rebuttal to Flint and what cities can do, but it ended up kickstarting a $500 million school modernization campaign that brought clean water to every single public school, that brought air conditioning to about 3 dozen schools. Now I'm on a mission to renovate each and every school inside and out because it's got to be that promise that has to happen for every child, every family, and a new generation. But at the end of the day, I'm running for mayor after 20 years of organizing, after less than 2 terms on city council where we moved huge things through our city council body, to say that we never had to live like this. And I'm running for Philadelphia like it's home and like we're all family, and we are not leaving anybody behind.
100%. Thank you so much. That really answered the question for sure. Um, you talked a lot about just how organizing has sort of informed um, your politics and your career thus far. 2016 to now, obviously, like a lot's happened. From then to 2023 that we're in now. Just in terms of like the national landscape, just in terms of just the propensity for like one of our largest parties to just go on full out white supremacist, like without having to like mask it. Um, what, in your opinion, just like on the national landscape and also like on the local landscape, like in Philadelphia, what's changed since 2016?
I mean, everything's changed, maybe not so much changed, but has really revealed itself since Trump's terms in office. I'm not sure that everything was, let's just say what was unsaid is now openly said. What was once practiced behind closed doors is now openly practiced in the city, in your state capitals, in your Congress, and in our Supreme Court, right? So I think that the difference really is that it's all before us. It's nakedly staring us in the face: white supremacy, xenophobia, misogyny, hate, patriarchy, all these things that we had blatant, capital markets crushing individuals. Like, this is all the stuff that we had seen time and time again. The difference is, and the reason why I'm on your show, even though you're in Pittsburgh, and I'm here in Philly, is that, this is one Pennsylvania. But more importantly, I want people to stop thinking about solving all the problems through Congress and through our state legislatures. I've always said, no one's fighting harder for Philadelphia than Philadelphians themselves. And I've proven it, and I've been part of those fights. Nobody is bringing in solutions. There's no rescue train that's coming in. If we want to turn this nation around, I want it to be led through great American cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and all the places in between. I am a powerful believer in local action, local organizing, and local politics, because when we can show that actually people want the things and that they can benefit from what local governments can do, because we can reach people a lot more quickly. We can be a lot more nimble and diverse, and we are on the ground with our people. Then I think our politics can shift, and they actually have to. Many of us spent much of 2022 probably sending obscure amounts of money to places like Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia and Florida, and definitely people there sent money to Pittsburgh to get Summer Lee elected into Congress. But in 2023, 5 of America's largest cities, of which Philadelphia is the only one on the East Coast, Philadelphia is one of 5 American cities that's going to elect the next mayor, governing millions and millions of people all across the country. And I want us to show a different way about how people can live, how children should grow up, and how a city can rise. And if we do that, in this city, 250 some years ago, where we wrote a blueprint for a new nation, we're writing a new one. But this one that comes out of communities, not one that was meant to suppress and oppress people. But this one is about tapping into the potential of individuals by making sure we center on safety, by making sure we center on a city's livability, that we talk about a resilient climate and economy for the future that isn't about segregating or, oppressing neighborhoods of color and environmental, racism, and that we have a chance to really build. It's a different type of progressive politics and language, I think, than some people want to label us as. Like, people want to think about, progressives as slogans and hashtags. This is not slogans and hashtags. This is infrastructure. This is real budgets. This is policy that changes lives. This is policies that closes down jails and opens up schools. It is the kind of policy that makes sure that development is done without displacement, that taxes are fair and evenly across a city and is not borne by those who are least able to pay. It's about, a built environment that reflects, if this environment that's built around us reflects a patriarchy and a racist movement that has kept so many people in our city down, then we must build a new infrastructure that reflects something entirely different. And it will be transformative, it will be prosperous, and it will be healthy for our residents. So that's what I think I want to encourage people to think about, that the politics of this moment are dehumanizing, they're alienating, and they are designed to crush hope. Um, and my biggest enemies are always cynicism, apathy, and the belief that nothing ever changes. And our movement is proving each and every day that when we step into the room, everything has to change, and the people have to benefit. And they're the ones that say it, not us.
No, thank you. And that's 100%. I think the framework you laid out about just like, you know, politics itself being like, exclusionary in this moment, right? Just like inherently, I think is like, that's the big structural thing that we have to change. I think that's kind of the crux of it. So, um, you kind of revealed this through talking about your organizing and just like, how much you value the community, and also just like how you view like the purpose of our political system right now. But like, how would you describe your political philosophy, and how does that philosophy inform, how you approach difficult decisions, on a lot of issues?
I mean, I have a community organizer mentality, which means that my coming into political office isn't meant to make me more powerful. It's meant to make communities and people more powerful, more stronger, more resilient than they've ever been. And so, what I think about first is like when I initially came in, Philadelphia is often talked about as the poorest large city in the country, where almost 1 out of 4 residents live in poverty. But for me, you can't have poverty on that scale by accident. Like that is just not by accident. Everything in the system is geared, whether intentional or not. So take intent off the table because I don't want to like argue about whether people meant to or didn't. But everything in the system is geared towards ensuring and keeping people down. And thus, everything that we do in government has to be a conscious reversal of that. And a really good example of this that I did in city council was around evictions. We probably were one of the highest evicting cities in the country, 4th highest in the nation. We did 22,000 households a year, not even people. That's households. Okay. That's families. That's like groups of people who are evicted with a knock on the door that was 10 minutes and you had 10 minutes to vacate the property with everything you could carry out with you. And we had a practice here where we didn't tell people when they were actually being evicted. We didn't give people advance notice of an eviction. So these are traumatizing situations. I always remembered it because when I was a teacher in a public school, I remembered when, students would come and go out of my classroom and I would say, what happened to, one of my kids who had been in there for like months. And it wasn't like, a social worker came and knocked on my door or the principal or someone from the city came and told me what happened to that child. It was another 10-year-old in my 4th grade classroom, who told me that, this child had gotten evicted and they're not coming back to school anymore because they don't live here and we don't know where they are. And I never forgot that. So when I came into city council, the first thing that I did was enact like efforts to really have a focus on how renters are. So we have almost 50% renters here in the city of Philadelphia, almost no protections that were really done well for them. And we were evicting people, 500 households every single week, 52 weeks out of the year. 70% of individuals were women, 74% involved a Black tenant, and almost half of them involved like children or somebody who was disabled or someone who was elderly. And this is just inhumane. When I first came in, most people said, well, it's a contractual agreement and I don't get involved in contracts. This is like a problem between a renter and a landlord. So it's not our business. But we started with large town halls. We started with testimonies and hearings about the consequences of evictions. We heard about it not just from renters, not just from landlords. We heard about it from teachers and educators. We heard about it from healthcare professionals. We heard about it from individuals who talked about housing and homelessness in the city of Philadelphia. We heard about it from youth advocates and from folks who talked about the inhumanity of walking into a courtroom and seeing a wall of lawyers representing landlords and not a single person anywhere anywhere on your side to explain what your rights were. So we started to turn that around. We ended up building, tenant legal defense fund, lawyers for a day. But at the end of the day, what we were driving towards was we cannot evict. We cannot evict as the first thing that we do. And the people who have to say that is not a court, not a judge, not a landlord, not a contractor. It's got to be the people who are experiencing the consequences of the eviction. And the city has to recognize it. Once we did that, once we put moms and single moms, especially in front of people, once we put veterans and seniors who talked about substandard housing, roofs that leaked, snow that fell into a bedroom, we started to turn this conversation around. In the last 4 years, not in 10, in 4 years, we slashed the eviction rate by more than 2/3. We distributed hundreds of millions of dollars in rent assistance to landlords and tenants all across the city, and probably the biggest rescue effort that had ever happened. And our law that we passed in Philadelphia is now replicated in 180 cities across 36 states. And earlier this month, Joe Biden put it into the White House's National Renter Bill of Rights as a corner piece of how we uplift people and keep them housed. I say all this because this didn't take 10 years, and it definitely didn't start in City Hall. If it was going to start in City Hall, the answer would be no. We would not have gotten anywhere. This was centered in communities, in people, and our ability to allow people to tell their stories, to express their needs and their desires. And then we marshaled the resources to change everything. And when we changed it here in Philly, we can change it for a nation. So I hope that's a good example of why a people first agenda is not just a slogan. It's not just an obscure, organizing strategy. It is a recipe for how politics and community movements can actually transform harmful things and move the country towards a better future and agenda.
100%. I really appreciate just like your ethos and where you're coming from. Community first activism is honestly like the only way that things get done. And I think that's lost, in a lot of like our digital world, frankly. You know what I mean? So I think, yeah, it's one thing to sort of reach out to the community. It's another thing to actually converse and have like meaningful dialogue. What message do you have to people, who, like you said, right, feel dehumanized by our political systems, feel disenfranchised? What is the message, that you have for people to motivate people to come out in the primary, but also beyond that?
Yeah, we only get what we are organized to take. That is the thing that has driven me everywhere. I waited a long time for career electeds, wealthy CEOs, people with power and titles and the opportunity to make change. And when hard times hit, those folks scattered. And the people who stood resilient in the face of like unbelievable amounts of violence and disinvestment and disenfranchisement were the people and communities who have always made Philadelphia and every single neighborhood across this state and country strong. It was ordinary parents who were not going to tolerate a substandard school for their children. It was people who lived in and demanded the need for affordable housing, affordable rental spaces, while the city was building towers with tax breaks, hand over fist. It was people who demanded not to have recyclables burn in their neighborhoods or their water being poisoned by the neglect of basic practices. So I have never really relied upon or believed that solutions are only coming through city hall, state legislatures, and Congress. I've always believed that people have a profound understanding of what they both need and deserve. And when we actually go and are driven by those kinds of needs, not only do we deliver policy agendas that make sense and are like highly successful and responsive, they're also enormously popular. It's incredibly, I cannot tell you, when we first started out on the eviction diversion work, how deeply unpopular I was told this was going to be, that we were going to, make this all about, division and everything else. Well, it turns out that everybody wants to do what we're doing. And, honestly, my style of government is FOMO, fear of missing out. You don't want to miss this because everybody wants this. Everybody wants and needs a good school for their children. Everybody wants and needs affordable housing because it's literally the most attractive thing about Philadelphia when we're sandwiched between Washington, D.C. and New York City. Everybody wants a chance at economic opportunity that isn't just about a $7.25 an hour temporary job with no benefits. They actually want to lean into their creative potential. And so, I do want this place to be a vibrant home for the arts, for the creative economy, for worlds, and for jobs that haven't even been created yet. And that I need young people in particular to feel that they don't have to wait for somebody in Congress. I don't need a title. I never did to do it. But if I am the mayor, and one of the reasons why I'm running for mayor is because we have the chance to drive all that through will be the first, not just, a lot of people talk about first in this 100th mayoral election. But to me, it isn't about an individual set of firsts. It's a set of firsts that actually reach communities. The first mayor to lead with a people first agenda. The first mayor to really lead and transform housing, economy, the climate, our educational environment, our transit structure, for a real lived opportunity for a new generation to see opportunity and a home here in our city.
100%, 100%. So that kind of, you kind of answered my next question, which was about the jump from council to mayor. And I think your answer was kind of just the opportunity to drive, in the mayor's office. So I guess could you talk a little bit more about what that driving, looks like, but also with a bigger jurisdiction, being a mayor versus being a council person, how do you maintain those community connections, and how do you maintain, that line of communication to the community?
No, I think that's a great question. And I don't know that it's so much that I felt like the leap was council to mayor as much as it was from community into city government. I had a lot of questions. Like I said, I spent more than 20 years being one of the city's leading organizers, whether it was around, leading efforts around protecting immigrants and neighborhoods and from being displaced, or whether it was around public education and making sure that corporate entities didn't take up every single tax dollar that we ever had. So, to me, I went into the city council side because I wasn't sure whether these things could work. I was a little skeptical about whether you could make the kind of change that you wanted to see, because I had seen other people go into positions and, they're stymied, right? The bigger your legislative body, the less likely you're able to have that kind of profound impact. Sometimes you are hamstrung in all these different places that you didn't predict. But when I came onto city council, I really did see big systems fall and new systems of opportunity rise up, and that we were able to drive that when we were really in tune with our communities. So one of the reasons why I'm running for mayor after less than 2 terms on council is because I don't actually believe that connection to community can last for decades and decades and decades. There are a lot of people who run who are career electeds, and many of them are really good. And, I'll do credit to them. But I'm not that type of person. I'm somebody who needs to see seismic change happening across short periods of time. And I need to see that move because I've got kids in our schools, because I've got people who are making decisions about whether they can stay, because there's a safety crisis that's literally threatening the lives of people that I know and love in neighborhoods all across Philadelphia. So I left city council to run for mayor because I think what Philadelphia needs is somebody who is closely tied with communities, neighborhoods, and organizing, who isn't so ingrained in sort of the structural elements of what makes things politically possible rather than politically necessary. I am connected to what is politically necessary right now, even if it may not be politically possible in a given moment. I've never entered spaces where, everything we do is politically possible, because then it's probably not that as great a big thing. We're trying to change the limits of what's politically possible. And that means entering into uncomfortable spaces, widening your range. I personally believe the things that we have been fighting for does not have to be at odds with a healthy, economically prosperous and growing type of city. I think that the investments that we are seeking unlocks economic potential in Philadelphia and creates more economic opportunity, because I think we keep people down. We're not, chasing other economic ventures that live outside. We're holding people back here in our own city. And so, it's my belief that the longer I felt, personally for me, that I stayed in city government, the more I was likely to be restricted by what was politically possible in any given moment. And I just wasn't going to wait. And I never have been that kind of person. And, I hope that it shows other people that politics is about timing and understanding moments in time. And sometimes great people miss a moment, and sometimes moment meet really bad people. And you have to do your best nonetheless. We don't get to choose our moments in time. We have to create them. And so I've done that most of my life. I'm trying to do that now, and I hope Pittsburgh can watch. You did a tremendous amount with incredible people that you've had, certainly with the leadership of Summer Lee. But we're trying to do that in Philadelphia, and I hope you will see the city and its people rise.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, so like one of the big issues, and I think that leads to a lot of people to just kind of like not care about politics, right? Is public safety, right? In particular for a lot of folks in the Black community who have seen our community systemically disrupted, by police, on every level. I guess like what is your vision for public safety, and community investments? A, to reduce the issues of violence, and I mean that just like not just violence amongst people, but violence towards people from other sources.
Yeah. So, I've been very clear that violence is, the violence that comes between people is, exacerbated by the violence that surrounds people all the time, whether it's the massive disinvestments that we've seen in our city over the years, the absolute pulling out of government institutions during COVID has had a profound impact on leaving so many people behind, and especially a generation of people who are 30 and under. That is really the group that is heavily impacted by violence, that's heavily impacted by family dysfunction and disunity, that's heavily impacted by chaotic economies that have left children and families so unstable. For me, it's not just enough for shootings and homicides to go down. I need health metrics for people across the spectrum to go up. Like the idea that people live better, experience, and are healthier is as important as reducing shootings. But there's no question in our city that public safety is the number one issue. And as mayor, my job is to make sure every Philadelphian is safe and feels safe. I've talked a lot about how on day one, I intend to declare gun violence as a public health emergency, and we will convene all of our city agencies to make sure that we do a number of different things. One, that we're solving crimes, which I think is one of the most devastating things that we experience right now. We're actually not solving crimes, so we do need to lean in, making sure that we're reorganizing our police department, that we're investing in better technology, other types of things to make sure that we solve crimes, that we address some of the things that are drivers of it. But we really do need to make sure that accountability for harm done is part of the dialogue around safety. And it's important for all of us to recognize that. That is absolutely a pro-public, pro-health initiative. But at the same time, and I'm also very clear, like, in an emergency situation, we have basic things that aren't happening. Like our 911 response times are the second highest in the country. So we need to be working on making sure that when people call for help, help is on the way. But one of the things that I did when I was on city council was also recognize a lot of people call 911 for mental health emergencies and other non-police related items. So I helped pilot the first non-police mobile mental health crisis unit, because a lot of the violence that starts in communities often starts from things that could de-escalate really quickly instead of escalating upwards from get-go. Or police arrive, say there's nothing I can do, walk out the door in a domestic violence situation, in a situation of an individual who's suffering from a mental health breakdown and really needs help, but police officers, it's not within their purview. It was really important to do that in the wake of the murder of Walter Wallace by police officers who arrived on the scene shortly after his family called about a mental health situation that he was experiencing. And, it is my intention as mayor to expand that dramatically so that thousands more calls can go into non-police professionalized response units, and more of our officers can spend time on the 911 calls where people are actually requiring and begging for a police officer to immediately show up and address the situation and calm it down. And then, I've been very clear that we don't support victims of crime at all. There's a lot of dialogue about how hurt people hurt people. We know who could be the next victim, because we know the next victim is often a victim themselves, and we offer very few services. So when I was dealing with a young man who had intervened in a convenience store robbery, he defended two teenage girls who had been shot, or who are going to be, potentially hurt in this, convenience store robbery. And he himself was shot. He was paralyzed. And because he was paralyzed, he lost his job. And when he lost his job, he lost the roof over his house. And he is a father of two children himself. And as we know, if you lose a house, you're very likely to lose custody of your children. And this cycle of violence with an individual who is literally a hero in a moment, and a city that left him behind. So our office worked for almost 3 to 4 months to try and get him a voucher through our housing authority, to try and get him supports and money for things paid. Those are the things that cities should be doing. Mayors need to be leaning in, like after every shooting. What I would do is I would absolutely blanket that area with officers bringing packages of food, healthcare workers with surveys, and mental health workers with surveys in hand, knocking doors on that block of any kind of shooting that had ever occurred, asking near neighbors what they needed, what they saw. Things were damaged. We should be getting supports out to repair windows, car doors, and broken things, because those are also attacks on poor people and on communities that are suffering from violence. And cities have to take the experiences of, and especially survivors' lives, very seriously. And I don't see us doing that. So those are the areas that I would 100% lean in on.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is sort of broad, like racial inequality spans quite literally like every facet of our lives. From housing to education to healthcare, quite literally everything, when it comes to like what's needed for the future, I guess just like what's something that we need to move beyond those inequalities that sort of relates to all of those issues.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, I don't want to be defined by the worst thing that's happening to us right now, which is about the safety issue. Because honestly, if you were really to talk about it, you know, this started years and years ago. It's years of disinvestment, years of walking away, and years of a city that can't understand that its economic potential is in its own people and not in massive corporate towers or downtown structures. You've got to invest in the economic power and potential of your own people. That's how cities turn around. That's how people revitalize. That's how we grow and become more healthy. I will say, for me, it starts with your immediate environment. It is an absolute disgrace that you can walk through. You don't need income demographic. None of us do really, to know which neighborhoods and communities are the poorest in the city, because you can walk in and right away there's trash that's everywhere, illegal dumping, vacant lots, abandoned cars, darkness more than anything else, a lack of public infrastructure and institutions. That is literally the bread and butter of what cities ought to do. So my mayoral plan under my administration is to make sure that all of our city services are redeployed out to communities most in need. And that means I don't do once a week trash service all over the city of Philadelphia, pretending everybody is the same and equal and that's all you get. I am doing we're doing targeted sanitation, illegal dumping practices, and pickups in communities that are deeply impacted. We're going through and we're lighting up streets that are dark, and especially in neighborhoods that have seen impacted levels of violence. We are sealing and greening vacant lots. I've talked about remediating 50% of all the vacant lots within my first year of office to make sure that nobody has to live in this manner of fear with a little child walking their way to school, being absolutely petrified while walking by abandoned house after abandoned house after abandoned house. We're going to convert those things into green spaces, into safer places that we're going to be working with community members to be able to develop while we get those lots back into more productive use. But these are the things that they start. And then, my heart, the one of the driving reasons why I'm running is what I talked about at the beginning. I can't leave our kids behind. And that means I'm leaning into the promise of education. Ross, you and I both know that Pittsburgh and Philadelphia have suffered the consequences of a racist state funding formula denied Black and brown immigrant kids all over the state of Pennsylvania, and poor kids too, of all races, the right to an equal and fair education. We have a Commonwealth court ruling that declared the funding system here in Pennsylvania unconstitutional, unjust. We knew it 25 years ago. We have it in writing today. And now I am that mayor who is going to take new investments into our public education system, and actually drive a real vision for reforming education that a lot of people, I think that you fairly say, Ross, have been jaded about. Can anything really change here? We have these low functioning schools and, a tolerance of dysfunction. I've never tolerated that. I've gone into schools and turned around violent school climates in less than 2 years. I brought in clean water and kickstarted a modern school campaign. We can move our school system along to health and sustainability and to decency and dignity for our kids, but it is going to take an all-out effort and somebody who has been relentless every single step of the way to make sure that every child gets what they deserve. They're going to get a clean, warm school building. They're going to have programs that are open after school, on weekends, and throughout the summer. We are going to connect our high schoolers and our young people with internships and job opportunities that actually meet people's needs and their interests. It's not just going to be about clean up these streets or a low-level, desk job at a, corporation that's doing it for charity. It's actually going to be leaning into the creative potential of young people, whether they want to be in a music studio or an artist studio, whether they want to learn how to become an EMT, get a driver's license, or learn a new trade. These are the things that cities, a school system, and communities can drive. So I am deeply committed to that. The last thing I'll say, really quickly, is that I'm here to build a new city. I believe in development. I just think that development means that our people are actually as developed as the towers and glass buildings that people want to build. I want the people of our city to be developed. So I want a climate infrastructure that stops Black communities from flooding. I need cooling and tree canopies in neighborhoods that have long been denied it. I want to make sure our transit system is safe so children and poor neighborhoods, especially those who lack cars, don't get hit by one. We have cities to build, and those are jobs, those are opportunities, those are exciting times. And I hope that people find not only hope in that, but some joy as well.
Thank you. No, thank you. This is the last question before we, go ahead and close out. You yourself mentioned that you're a person who you want to get things done, right? You just don't want to be working aimlessly. You want to, work and see things get done fairly quickly. what's your message to people who might also feel that way, right? But may not understand the nuances of just the legislative process in general?
Yeah. Here's what I say. Change happens on many different levels. Laws and legislative processes are one of them, but they're not the be all and end all of change. And in fact, a lot of times for me, laws are useful only at the beginning of something. When I'm like when we issued an eviction moratorium, that was a big law that really changed a lot of things. It was very controversial. It only lasted 60 days because everything that we did in those 60 days changed everything. Or it's at the back end of a thing to make it permanent, to say we're never going back to the old ways. And that was when we, for example, passed a law to make sure that hourly workers, 150,000 hourly workers in Philadelphia, would get advance notice of their work schedules, and that they had to get paid if their shifts got canceled at the last minute. That law had to happen at the back end. In between, though, there's a million things that have to happen. We need budgets that get passed. We need town halls and forums to shape the conversation about the kind of policies that we want to build. We can change policies without laws. We don't actually have to have a law every single time. Sometimes you need a policy shift, like we're not going to expel kindergartners, or we're not going to expel elementary school kids out of our public schools, or we're going to deliver and make sure that, that the work that we did on those mental health mobile crisis units there was no law around that. That was like working tirelessly with a coalition of mental health advocates, police reform advocates, and others, and community leaders for Treatment Not Trauma Coalition that really met constantly with our Department of Behavioral Services, with our health departments, with emergency clinics, with police officers, to change the mindset of how we do things. For people who are frustrated with legislative processes, absolutely, welcome to the club. Legislative processes can be endless, but they are not the be all and end all of why you're in government. You are in government to change the political temperature of what is possible. And that comes through many, many different things, including laws. You should absolutely have laws under your belt to prove that you can bring it to that kind of legislative conclusion. But in between, I need budgets to change. I absolutely need policies to change. I need people who have held the same positions to behave differently because those policies have changed. I need infrastructure to go out into neighborhoods and communities. And I need to know when we pass that budget, that budget is actually delivered, and that people in those communities and neighborhoods actually feel it. And if that answer is no, then we start that process all over again. And we have to be tireless and relentless. I want people not to feel like politics is just held by those with political titles. That is not the case. That's not how I started. And honestly, that's not how I end either. So, people have to know that every single thing is political about our lives right now. If you're Black, life is political. If you're a woman, life is political. If you're LGBT and trans, life is political. So there's no reason that somebody has to put a title on. Go out, organize. We only get what we're organized to take, and we have a world to change.
100%. 100%. Both of our existences are 100% a political statement to begin with in this country. Um, well, thank you. Thank you. So that's the end, sort of like, our questions. Is there anything that like we didn't bring up that you want to bring up, that you like wish we would have asked you?
No, not at all. I mean, look, I think there are 10 weeks left to go. Our election in Philadelphia is May 16th. There are career electeds, wealthy CEOs who want to buy up this election and say that their voices are going to run the city like they have for many, many decades. I hope what people saw in this hour with us together is a different kind of person. And it's not unlike the people that Pittsburgh elected into Congress or into state elected houses. There is a burning desire all across the country coming out of communities that we don't want the same old status quo politics, and that it does take different looks, different appearances, and different forms. I am unlike anybody who has ever come through political office in Philadelphia. And it's not just because I'm a woman. It's not just because I'm Asian American. It's not just because, I'm, 5 foot too in heels. It's because I come out of communities that have been organizing for decades around the core issues that really matter. So I hope what the you know this audience sees is a real hunger in Philadelphia. And if you're excited about what you see, please help support us. You can go to www.helengym.com. Please support the campaign. Please connect with other people who are supporting the campaign. Proud to be supported by the Teachers Union, One Pennsylvania, Unite Here, District Council, Ask Me 47, by social workers, librarians, and Parks and Rec Center workers who know that our city is going to be, all of our cities are going to be rebuilt from the ground up. So May 16th is our election. We're up, and I hope you'll see a real fighter come through.
We definitely hope so too. Thank you so much. One last question, just before we log off. What brings you joy?
I would say, being in and around young people, like with the high school events and things that we've been doing, it's been joyful, talking to people, especially young people, about the arts, about creativity, about a city that they want to see happen is joyful. And it just takes you away kind of from the political moments and puts you squarely back where I'm going back to one way or another. I'm either going back as mayor and bringing City Hall with me, or I'm going back as a fierce fighter for Philadelphia communities and young people all across the city. We're going to see something change here in Philadelphia one way or another, and we're not going to quit until it happens.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Councilperson Gym. Thank you so much for tuning in to everyone who joined us today. And tune in next Tuesday at 6 p.m. for our city controller candidate forum. So that's going to be every candidate's here. It's less of a long form interview, more of a debate. So definitely want to be there, get your information, and be informed for the election on May 16th. All right. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys on Tuesday.